I want to show you how to pot. This is the bottom of a self-watering hanging pot. This is the insert, and there are the feet on the insert which touch the water and pull it up into the pot. We're going to fill these feet with coconut coir. Right now it's coconut coir that I'm putting into the base of this pot. Straight coconut coir, nothing else. You can see the cocoa coir, and that's from the cocoa coir. You're going to push the cocoa coir down into the holes, not hard, but just to make sure there's no holes or it's not packed in there. There you go. You can see how much is in there, just a little layer on the bottom. Not sure what I'm saying there. The audio didn't work, so I'm dubbing over the top of it. Now we're going to be using self-watering soil. Okay, so we're repotting that plant into that hanging pot. And I wanted to cover how to take it out. So on this, you're going to grab the base of the plant and pull it out if you can. Sometimes it's hard to get them out of their pots. So you're holding it at the base and you're going to place it in the pot. And the next thing you're going to do is try to center it in the pot so that all edges of the plant are equal distance from the sides of the pot so that it's in the middle of the plant. Now some of the pots obviously have that chunk that's sticking there, sticking into the center so that it will force you to put the plant in not the center because that is in the way. So what I just did was I made a ridge within the soil so that I could still put that into the center of the pot. So yeah, I made a groove in there so that it would accommodate the size. Now what we're talking about is how tall the plant is from the top of the pot, because you want to make sure that you leave some space between the top of the pot and the top of the soil for water to be able to sit on top for a minute before it soaks in, so that when you're watering you don't have water just pouring off the sides because it's not soaking into the soil. You want to have about a ½ inch. It depends on the situation, but if you just said a ½ inch as a rule of thumb, leave a ½ inch gap from the top of the pot to the top of the soil. So I'm showing you here that I'm holding it with one hand so that it stays in the center of the pot, and then adding soil all around the perimeter of the plant. I wish the camera was angled a little bit differently, but I'm rotating the pot and adding soil in so that you're not adding more soil on one side than the other. You're trying to add soil around the whole edge of the plant. And as you can see, I'm holding on to it with one hand, holding it straight up and down so that when the soil is finished, we finish putting the soil in, it's centered in the pot and it's also straight up and down in the pot. Now, as you can see, there's the soil, there's a gap between the top of the soil and the top of the pot. We want to go ahead and just tap that pot. You can hit the sides of it. You can tap it on something firm to get all of the holes that are in there filled in with soil, because there will be holes and that can damage the roots if you leave the holes in there. So hitting it works really well. Tap it not too hard. And you can also tap it, the base of it, maybe on the floor or on something good and solid. So now you look at the top of the soil. You see that there's a nice gap from the side of the pot down to the soil, and you also see that the soil is level across the top. And the plant is centered in there, and it's straight up and down. Okay, I'm adding a little bit more soil after we tapped the sides so that it's a little bit higher up in the pot. Now, one thing to note is if you are planting something into a pot that's a little bit big for the plant, you can have lower soil in the pot because you want the plant to soil ratio to be correct. So you don't want tons of soil for a single plant that can make it too wet for the plant. I'm not sure what I'm saying in this video. I had the headphone jack filled up. Okay, here's another picture, and it just was screeching, so I'm dubbing over the top. Okay, there you go. That looks beautiful. It's about a ½ inch, 3/4 of an inch from the top. That's nice for that plant. The plant's in the center. Hitting it again after adding a little bit more soil to it. The difference between hitting it and pushing it down is when you push it down, it compacts the soil and it makes it hard for the roots. So what you can do once you get this far, if you notice that the plant is not centered correctly, this is a good time for you to just scoot it over before you add water in because it's fairly loose in there. So right now is when you look at this and you say, is this looking good? And if it is looking good, then you're ready to move on to the next step. So there you go. Another thing to be aware of is make sure that the soil line is hitting the top of the plant or the bottom of the plant in the right spot. So before you put the soil in, look at the stems and see where the soil line is hitting them. If you bury some of the stems, some plants are fine with that. That will kill other plants or it will kill the leaves. So make sure you haven't buried the plant too deep in the soil, and if it's too shallow in the soil, it's usually obvious because you'll have a mound in the center where the plant is not buried deep enough in the soil. The other thing you want to do is make sure there's no leaves buried in the soil. A lot of times that can happen, so take all the leaves out. Now, for this self-watering pot, we went ahead and put it in its container. And you're going to add the gauge now, which just goes in that hole. So now the plant is nicely beautiful in there. We've added the gauge. The soil is the right height. The plant is centered. There's room. We've tapped it. Also being careful not to get soil on the leaves as you add soil. So you noticed how I was holding the leaves up out of the way when I added water, or I'm sorry, soil. Now we're adding water. Always water around the entire circumference of the pot. So don't pour all the water in one spot. It may not reach the other side of the soil, which means that side will not get watered. Also, you water down at the soil line. You're not supposed to be pouring water right on the leaves. So I'm not sure what I'm doing. I think I'm setting this up so that we can tilt the camera down and you can see stuff better. So, watering around, trying to hit all of the soil, like pour a little bit of water all over all of the soil, not just in one spot like I was saying. Now these self-watering pots are more forgiving than other types of pots, other types of soil, because the water tends to travel through self-watering soil. Once you wet all over the place after repotting, you can go ahead and fill up the reservoir. But don't just fill up the reservoir. You need to water the whole top part of the soil all the way around it before you fill up the reservoir. Okay, this guy is done. The last piece is just to pat the soil down a tiny bit. And then usually, if the plant is not too leafy, I will go ahead and squirt the leaves with some neem oil and wipe them off. Because a lot of times plants can get soil on them when you repot them, and it's also a nice opportunity to just give the plant a nice little bath. If you have this inside and you can squirt it with water, that's always a nice thing to do.